Hey everybody, it's Brandon, and at the moment I unfortunately have about a long form video or two that I'm working on that unfortunately needs a little more time to develop, and so I'm not able to put those out in this particular week that this video is coming out because I would have done it otherwise. But thankfully this has opened up the opportunity for me to come back and do another tier list video, whereas last time I did one particularly on iconic guitar body shapes, and that one actually was pretty well received. People dug it. And so I thought I would come back and do another one if that one did well. And sure enough, we have a good chance to do that here today with another way of doing a tier list that I was looking forward to do. So in this tier list video, we're going to take a look at the albums produced by the rock band Queens of the Stone Age. We're going to rank them here. I know it's a kind of a little bit of a shorter looking tier list than what you may normally see, but there's a reason for that, and we'll lay that out here shortly. For those of you who don't know, but I would definitely recommend you go check Queens of the Stone Age out if you like rock music. They are a rock band specifically in the genres of what you would call desert or stoner rock, because that originated from the Palm Desert, California music scene. Several of the many members of Queens of the Stone Age had been involved in this particular music scene together on a variety of other bands that produce other great stuff. Kind of the predecessor, if we want to go that route, of Queens of the Stone Age was a band called Caius. There have been numerous people that have gone through this particular band, with the only constant force remaining being the frontman, Josh Homme, one of my favorite guitarists and probably one of my favorite musicians overall just because of the unique styles he has brought to guitar music, even sort of wonky uses of very obscure gear at times to produce really cool sounds with that. That's been kind of instrumental to Queens of the Stone Age since their inception. The band, however, currently has a very consistent lineup otherwise of Troy Van Leeuwen on guitars, Michael Schumann on bass, Dean Fertitta on keys and additional guitars, and John Theodore on drums. But among the many people that have contributed to Queens of the Stone Age in some way, there are definitely some other notable names in there. Alan Johannes, I hope I said that right, has been involved in the band for some time, on and off. Natasha Schneider, may she rest in peace, was a big part of the band for a long time. Dave Grohl of Nirvana fame and also the Foo Fighters frontman has also contributed to many Queens of the Stone Age works, particularly their third album. The singer, Mark Lanegan, who's also going to be heavily mentioned in this video, contributed greatly to numerous records for these Queens of the Stone Age albums over the years. And the list of their collaborators is pretty damn deep. If you look at that on Wikipedia, there's probably numerous other names that, again, I'm probably failing to mention at the moment, but there's a deep list out there, and you can find all sorts of cool names that are associated with this band in one way or another. Now, as someone who has a lot of experience in playing around in cover tribute bands here in Metro Denver, I have played in a couple Queens of the Stone Age tributes, and probably in that experience of doing this with cover tribute bands, this is the particular band that I feel I have the most knowledge of material of when it's come to stuff that I've learned and prepped for playing on stage. And the really fun reason for that is because I have played at least 3 instruments for Queens of the Stone Age tributes. I've played bass parts, guitar parts, and keys parts. I've even dug a little further and hopefully will one day get a cover up at least of one song using a lap steel guitar. And yeah, it's a really fun band and also really fun guitar music that any guitarist would pick up really easy. Personally, I've also found that Queens of the Stone Age sometimes tends to be a bit of an acquired taste, say for a rock band. But if you're willing to go down the rabbit hole of not just the Queens of the Stone Age material that has that name on it, but some of the other, well, not some, but many of the other projects that the other members have been involved in, there's a lot of cool interconnected stuff with this band that is always also worth checking out. But again, we're focusing strictly on QOTSA albums today, and how this is going to work is we have just 4 tiers in this video. S tier is going to be the best albums that I think that QOTSA has ever produced. A and B tiers are also going to be good albums. Some I think are better than others. And then the C tier is just going to be reserved for the one album that personally I really don't consider a favorite in any particular way. There is not a D and an F tier on this tier list of mine specifically because I do not believe this band has ever put out an outright bad album, and so I don't think it was necessary to have the D and F tiers on here for that. In the interest of maybe not taking a deep dive on every single song on the album, just to keep this video chugging along, I am going to give kind of some general thoughts about the album in particular, but I also have set aside a list of approximately about 3 songs per album that maybe I'll talk a little further on, just my feelings on those and how they fit in the scope of the overall album. And lastly, because I am indeed giving an opinion on the internet, let's take it easy. This is just my opinion on this. If you have any disagreements or any other thoughts on any of these albums where they should be, certainly feel free to drop those in the comments of where you're watching this and we can discuss that further. It's just music, people. We're just here to enjoy the stuff. We will start with 1998's self-titled debut. Hopefully I'm not going to get a community guideline strike over this, because there are some variations to this album cover that, I mean, this is already kind of pushing it, but there are other versions of this album cover that are much more salacious than what we have here. But nonetheless, this is what the band started with. Really, this was also Josh Homme, just he recorded everything and he had a drummer with him that recorded along with the first record. And a lot of the sentiment that I feel I've seen online with this particular album, and I definitely do agree with, is this is kind of just an extension if Kyuss had continued to carry on as a band. Of course, Kyuss had broken up by the time, I think, about the time that this record was at least in development. Of course, you can check Wikipedia easily on that. But a lot of the tracks on this album do sound very in line with what Kyuss was producing. Plenty awesome tracks on this album, and stuff that they're still playing intermittently live to this day, which I think is excellent. Hell, they even at one point reissued this album, and I think it was 2011, and they went on a tour playing this whole album front to back, which I think is especially cool. Ultimately, I do kind of think this album is a bit held back by having that aura of being, you know, just kind of a continuation of what Kyuss was doing. But hey, one of the cool things with that is this album was recorded entirely in C standard tuning on electric guitar, which is great because that's my favorite guitar tuning, and Queens of the Stone Age has a hell of a lot to do with why I love using C standard tuning, especially like now when I try to write my original stuff. Another thing I generally get about this album in full is you can kind of throw this on. Yeah, there are some tracks you may more intently listen to than others, but you know, you can just kind of throw this album on and it's just kind of a really sort of low-key sort of vibe, I guess. It's not necessarily all in your face. There's certainly some really cool crushing riffs in here. So I have 4 tracks for this particular, So I have 4 tracks from this album I would consider my personal highlights on this. The first 2 would be Avon and Mexicola. Both really cool tracks that have really interesting guitar riffs. I was always confused listening to Avon at first because I thought it was an E standard, but then you hear the chorus and it's the do 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 do. It hits down on an E flat power chord during that little chorus bit or post-chorus, whatever that is. And then in particular for Mexicola, what really anchors this track and makes it sound cool is, damn, that bass tone is absolutely gritty and filthy, and it really drives the track along really well. And the next highlight track I have on here is If Only. Hopefully I will get around to doing this someday in a cover video because it's a really funny and easy track and really mellow and whatnot. But also because I have a specific patch that I crafted for a Rhodes keyboard or piano sound that I was using on that track for live shows, and yeah, it was just really fun to kick back on and play. And in the sense of a cover video, it's definitely a track that I would be ready to slam out at any given moment in case I need something like quick to put out there. If Only, we'll see how soon my If Only cover comes out. And the last track I have on here, and I think is my personal favorite on this album, is the opener, Regular John. If you need a good introduction of why C standard is like my favorite guitar tuning, it's this particular song. The riffs are all just kind of in a trance together. There's some really cool lead stuff that's going on. The bridge part is a little interesting as well, where you have like a harmonized volume swell thing going on. Which I think is all really cool, and it's all panned in different directions and whatnot. But at least for one of the Queens of the Stone Age tributes that I've worked with, we opened our C standard section of songs with Regular John because that's a perfect song to open up that sort of section of songs with. Obviously, this is a good album with how I have the tier list constructed here, but what I feel and why I'm going to rank this album in B tier is just, again, it feels like it's kind of a continuation of Kyuss. It's not really the band having gone out and forged its own sound, maybe quite yet, but still, it kicks ass for what it does and what tracks are on it and what they all do well. So again, B tier for the self-titled debut. Next album we have in the order is Rated R, released in 2000. Probably the most jarring thing about this album is what the opening track consists of. That is a feel-good hit of the summer, and it's easy lyrics if you ever need a song to do at karaoke. Though if you're doing family karaoke, don't do that song. You're gonna get some weird looks. And with my own personal straight-edge aligned moral compass, I'm not really too much of a big fan of that opening track either, but it is funny, at least in a way, and can kind of throw people for a loop wherever you play it. So even if you're playing it in a band or again like karaoke or whatever, it's funny. I think what's really good to differentiate Rated R from the self-titled debut is that the self-titled debut is really out there with just throwing riff after riff at you nonstop right until the end in many cases. And this particular album with Rated R, they still do that where they have, a couple songs that are really anchored around repetitive riffs that, are just right up in your face. They do have some songs in here that are a lot more mellow. Aside from, you'll have a song like Feel Good Hit of the Summer, which is, again, a little aggressive even for its riffing. And then we have, getting into some of my favorite tracks here, a couple tracks on here that are very mellowed out, and a part of that comes into play with, again, singer Mark Lanegan, may he rest in peace, who contributed greatly to this album in many ways. The tracks that I have in mind for this album as my personal favorites, in particular, Autopilot was one that Mark Lanegan was involved in. Really cool, just kind of kickback song. It's a good song to relax to. Nothing really aggressive going on in there. And I think that's really cool because you see a lot of that later in Queens of the Stone Age songs on other albums. Is there are just plenty of times that you can just kind of sit back and chill and listen to it. Next song I had as a personal favorite on this album was Monsters in the Parasol. Probably, again, going back onto the side of, straight up riffs in your face kind of deal. But it's really interesting how they work this all together, and the little pre-chorus bit is really fun to play on guitar as well when you play the harmonizing guitar parts in that pre-chorus. It's, again, really simple riffs, but it's still really fun to play. What I also think is funny is you go look up the lyrics for the song, maybe on like Genius, and I don't remember how well it's maybe annotated, but there are some, funny quotes of Josh Homme saying in this for this particular song. Apparently it was inspired by his first trip on LSD. I've seen intermittently that they play songs off of this album in both E and C standard. Personally, I think Monsters in the Parasol just works best in E because it's not really going any lower than that. Lastly, and probably the favorite of favorites on this album, is Lost Art of Keeping a Secret. I covered this one a while back and it was a lot of fun. I played the piano, bass, and guitar parts to it. Again, another really easy, simple song to play if you have any interest in playing in C standard tuning. Another great song to get introduced to, working with that tuning and just jamming out with it. I think with this album, where it starts to be where Queens of the Stone Age kind of develops its own identity, it's still a great album nonetheless. Not one that I maybe particularly revisit myself all that much, so I'm going to put it in B tier alongside the self-titled debut. All right, here we go. This one's going to be probably quick and easy. The big boss of Queens of the Stone Age albums, Songs for the Deaf, released in 2002. Let's just get this out of the way. This album is an immediate S tier. This album is front to back absolutely amazing. Pretty much every song on the album is an absolute banger. Considering this is a concept album kind of revolving around you listen to this album front to back, say on a road trip of sorts. Kind of what this was developed as was Josh and the band driving out from Los Angeles to Joshua Tree, California. And as they drove along, the music on the radio kind of got a little less what you would normally hear, and then get a little more experimental, weird the further you got out into the desert. Personally, I have not actually taken the chance to listen to this album front to back yet, and I know probably people in the comments might be saying, what do you mean? Well, I guess I just haven't found maybe the road trip quite yet to want to do that with. I don't know, we'll make it something special one day. If I ever have a long trip on the road to go on, I'll just put this album on front to back and just no skips, just let it run. And that'd be really cool to listen to. So as I mentioned, every single song on this album is amazing. I did have to fight myself a little bit before I started recording this video because I wanted to make sure that I didn't outright just come and say, oh, hey, the entire album is great. I recommend every single song. It's a favorite. There you go. S tier, move on. I did want to pick out some songs that do this album more justice than the others, but again, this album is just a masterpiece in and of itself. We'll go down the list here because I've got 5 songs from this album that are probably my favorites of this whole album, which is a favorite. First is the opening track, You Think I Ain't Worth $1, But I Feel Like a Millionaire. Yeah, there's a little build up with the radio introduction, but this track is just straight in your face, C standard riffs, and it's just an absolutely awesome track to listen to. It's one that definitely, if I have it come on in the car, I'm not skipping any further. I'm letting that song run because it's a great song to drive to. Obviously, this is a gimme with this album, but No One Knows is also a favorite. It's a favorite of everyone who listens to this album, or even Queens of the Stone Age in the slightest. Signature song of theirs. As soon as I get the guitar solo for that song down, I'm definitely recording a cover because it's No One Knows. Everyone knows that No One Knows is an excellent song. What more do I need to say? If you haven't heard it, go listen to it for yourself because it's great. I put with the slash here, Song for the Dead and Song for the Deaf, just because if you ever watch live videos of those particular songs, they are very cool videos to watch. Probably two of my favorite songs to see them play live in any capacity. Granted, I have not yet seen them live myself, just talking about like live videos on YouTube. But with Song for the Dead, usually there's a mosh pit involved, and with Song for the Deaf, there's usually some weird trippy lighting that's going on as well. From what I understand, as of recent, on their current tour that they're on, the End of Nero tour, they are playing Song for the Dead quite often live, which I think is cool, and I think they're doing it mostly as a closer, which is even better. Send it out on a really high note. And lastly, I have on here Do It Again. Having played this song live at least once, I've always found it fun, especially because there's a good call and response kind of chant you can do with the crowd with this particular song, which is, easy. Da, 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 da. Hey, in my experience, crowds tend to like that call and response business, so if you're ever needing a additional song to play in your Queens of the Stone Age tribute band, I would recommend Do It Again, and Do It Again, and Do It Again. I don't think I need to say much more about this album that hasn't already been said. It's an easy S tier, and rightfully deserves that place. All right, and where we were just singing praises on Songs for the Deaf, unfortunately, this is where maybe I drop my maybe one controversial opinion in this video, is that the follow-up to this album, Lullabies to Paralyze, released in 2005, is personally my least favorite Queens of the Stone Age album. Again, with the way this tier list is set up, it is not an outright terrible album. Let me make that abundantly clear again. I don't really find myself really coming back to this one too much, and the favorite songs that I've actually picked from this album, I often forget that they're on this album. I know, obviously, there are going to be other people who are very into this album. For whatever reason, most of the tracks on this album just don't particularly do it for me in any particular way. This album, it's really only the favorite tracks that I have from this album are the ones that I do revisit from this album on a regular basis. But among my favorite tracks from this album, they are excellent songs. They just happen to end up on the album and I just don't listen to the most overall. The first track I have on this album is I Never Came. It's a really cool, kind of really mellowed out vibe. Because there are also some really kind of grating songs to listen to on this particular album, and I Never Came is not like a super grating song, like again most of the other tracks on this album. Yeah, really nice, easy listen. The next song I picked out from this album was In My Head. Really cool little piano part that's kind of buried in there in the mix that I've played live before and is really simple but really fun. I know fans of the Need for Speed video games, I don't know which one it was because I really didn't play that series, but In My Head did appear on a Need for Speed game, and people absolutely love the song because of that. In My Head is a song that I would definitely recommend if you're trying to ease someone into listening to Queens of the Stone Age. Is a good pick to get them started with. But the favorite amongst favorites for me in this album is definitely Burn the Witch, largely because it employs the lap steel guitar to great effect, and what I'm definitely working on to have that in a cover video someday. The whole song is really built around a thunderous pounding, just repeating E power chord with some very cool variations in the riffs worked in there. Also a really fun song to watch in the live videos. I don't know if they're playing that on the tour right now, but if they are, I'll be super hyped about it because I really like this song. But again, and maybe a bit unfortunately, because those are the only songs, again, that I really like to come back to on that album, really the rest of the album doesn't really get that much of a listen for me on a regular basis. So as mentioned, this will be in the bottom of my tier list here in C tier. Again, that's not to say it is a bad album outright, it's just not the one I listen to the most. I'm sorry if the album art doesn't really come up here because this is what I pulled prior to recording. But next up is Era Vulgaris, released in 2007. Had you asked me to rank Queens of the Stone Age albums when I first started getting into the band around the time COVID hit and I was discovering all sorts of new music, I probably would have put this at the bottom, but since then I have considerably warmed up to Era Vulgaris. There are a few songs on this album that are a bit of a grating listen, like on Lullabies, but not, I don't think, nearly to that much of an effect. There's also some really cool chill songs on here as well. Though it's not a personal favorite of mine, Make It With You has a really cool piano part, and that's a really cool chilled out love song. Not a song that I would think I would have ever expected at first Queens of the Stone Age to ever haven't gone and done, but nonetheless is a very cool song overall, and in playing it live, usually elicits a slow dance or two from someone out there in the crowd. From my experience. This album was also kind of where the core of the band that exists today and kind of its longest running incarnation really started coming into being, because Dean Fertitta and Michael Schumann joined in on keys and guitar and bass respectively, and they've been with the band ever since this album. I don't recall if they contributed to it, but they were certainly on the tours when this album was released, and they've been in the band ever since then. Another track that's not in my favorites, but I definitely warmed up to from this album in terms of having played it live, is Misfit Love. I used to not like that song at first, and then just through over time of playing it live, doing a keyboard, then a guitar outro kind of deal, was really fun to do, and has really made that song a lot more enjoyable for me to listen to as well. But to get into the favorites on this particular album, I'll start with Suture Up Your Future. Another really kind of chill vibe track, really kind of contrast with many of the other grading tracks that are on this particular album, and the heavier tracks even then. Next I have as a favorite on this album is Threes and Sevens, but holy hell is this song hard to play. In the time I've worked with Queens of the Stone Age tribute bands, that song has killed us in each band because it's fast paced. There's a lot going on. There's some weird timing stuff going on even with the bass guitar. Hell, the easiest part in that song is the lap steel part, and I've got that down, thankfully. And matching with the wild energy of the song, the music video is also pretty wild itself, which, of course, you want to check that out. Certainly, that's all out there on YouTube as well. And lastly, favorite amongst favorites for me in this particular album is Sick, Sick, Sick. This is a really cool song. I've played this live at a couple open mics before when I've just brought my little headrush board and plugged in, because it's a fun and easy song, and it actually borrows back from some of the earliest riffs on the first record, and even then a little bit from some Kaya stuff as well, where it has this really cool repeating riff that really drives the song. And it also has a really good call and response chorus that you can do with people. I remember doing that live one time, and it was fun. People really liked it. They were shouting with us, sick, 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 da-da-da-da-da. It was lots of fun seeing that. While the song is great itself, I find the music video kind of disturbing with its little cannibalism themes that are involved, but it's still kind of a cool video anyway, watching the band slowly be picked apart by a crazy cannibal lady. But make of that what you will. It's an interesting video for sure. I do think ultimately this is an album that really also helps define what Queens of the Stone Age is truly all about. And again, I've since my first listens of Queens of Stone Age ever, I've definitely warmed up to this album, very much so. And let's see here. Considering how much I've warmed up to it over the years, I think I will put it up in A tier. All right, next we have, and if you remember from the most recent cover video that I uploaded just prior to this particular video, we have Like Clockwork, released in 2013. In particular, I covered the track from this album, My God is the Sun, and people seem to really dig it. I shared it out in a Queens of the Stone Age Facebook group and got a lot of good feedback from people in that group. But with this album overall, we'll get it out of the way. This album is an immediate S tier for me. This album is also very amazing. I think it is on par with Songs for the Deaf in terms of how good it is. But in a very sharp contrast to Songs of the Deaf kind of being just, a concept album revolving around getting on a road trip, maybe with some buddies, and listen to the radio go by as you drive out in the desert. Like Clockwork as an album is very sad. This album is extremely sad in terms of its presentation. The backstory behind this particular album is that Josh Homme had unfortunately acquired a very nasty MRSA infection, which took him out of music for a long time, and basically, almost maybe in a way could have ended the band. But thankfully the rest of the band had also, talked him into, hey, let's get back in the studio and let's go to work. And this is the album that they came out with. Definitely, if you're getting into QOTSA, this album is definitely a front-to-back listen. Maybe not so much to the extent of Songs for the Deaf in terms of how that album is structured in its concept, but just many of the songs on this album will just kind of hit you in the gut in terms of emotional feels and the like. I picked 3 songs from this album that are my favorites. The first is I Sat by the Ocean. The chorus in this song is just absolutely beautifully built. With many sorts of harmonies, key parts even in the mix. I also like the employment of using the 12-string guitar with a guitar slide on there. Really makes for a cool little lick in the in between the verses and the like. Obviously, if you see from my most recent cover video, My God is the Sun is also a personal favorite off this album, just because of the sheer amount of stuff that is going on in that song. I think I mentioned in the video description of that cover, that's the first time I've ever put track panning information on screen for a cover, because there's a guitar track on the left side, there's a guitar track on the right side, there's the bass and another guitar in the center. The little keyboard part that's in the bridge is split binaurally, which all comes together to a really cool high energy track. Personally, if I ever get the chance, I would absolutely love to play that song live just because of how awesome it is. And also, it's a 3/4 rock song that is in 3/4 timing, which is also what waltzes are in. Waltz rock, waltzing and rocking. Beautiful combination, and they did excellently on that song. As much as I say good things about that song, the absolute favorite of this album for me is probably the saddest song on the entire album of this very sad album overall, I Appear Missing. Oh man, I have a lot of melancholic feelings hit me whenever I hear that song, and again, it's one that if I ever have it, come on my shuffle in my car speaker from my iPod, it's like I'm letting that thing run the whole way, just because it's a fantastic song. And again, one that I definitely want to take some time out. It may be a little bit to build together, but definitely a song that I want to cover in full sometime. So, as mentioned, excellent album overall. We kind of look at this here. We got the red album covers that are in the top tier here. But again, we've got Like Clockwork easily camping out alongside Songs for the Deaf in S tier. All right, next we have Villains, released in 2017. Rather than maybe just my one controversial opinion with Lullabies, this might be my other controversial opinion for this video, because this is probably the most flip-floppy album you could see out of QOTSA fans in terms of like it or hate it. I've seen a lot of complaints about this album, specifically because Mark Ronson was involved in the production of this album. Personally, however, I think this album is absolutely awesome. While it may not be as impactful as, say, Clockwork or Songs for the Deaf, what I think really is Villains' is good strength in terms of what it's doing is that in terms of lyrical content, it is definitely presenting still a lot of feelings of sadness and dark, broody feelings. But hey, we're throwing it over like dancey tracks, and I think that's absolutely awesome to hear. Whenever I hear this album in particular, I always want to say that many of the tracks on this album feel like they should go in a Grand Theft Auto game, just because there's kind of some similar tracks that ended up in the Grand Theft Auto 5 soundtrack that I think Villains would be perfect for. Rockstar maybe put some of these songs in GTA 6. I think that'd be great. I know when I played like Grand Theft Auto Online, and I actually took the time to say load in music where you can play music in Grand Theft Auto Online from your own music collection, I always felt like songs from Villains fit perfectly with the vibe of that game. And maybe that's why I like it so much, or part of the reason why I like it so much. But I think this album gets a lot of unnecessary hate, and I'm not entirely sure why. I've kind of seen complaints that John Theodore, who by this time had joined into the band on drums with Clockwork, it does seem the drums are a little further back in the mix, but I don't personally think it's anything that's really obstructive. I think this album is really constructed well overall, and I think this album still holds true to what Queens of the Stone Age is all about. It just happens to be probably the most upbeat album of the bunch, because I do a little bounce in my car. I want to dance along to these songs when I hear them come on. Or most of them, that is, because there's a couple slow ones on here. TLDR, Villains is a great album to me, and I will die on that hill. In terms of track listing, this is also the shortest QOTSA album at 9 tracks total, and I picked 4 of them that were my personal favorites. First being Domesticated Animals. I think the song is really cool. There is some funky time stuff going on there. Probably another one that I will hope to cover someday. Or some cool slide guitar bits that are going on there. And the back end of Domesticated Animals really crescendos into this kind of big, dramatic kind of stage piece, I guess. And it sounds cool that way. The next one I had was Hideaway, more on the laid-back side of things. Still has a good little bounce to it. I think on this song are some of the coolest falsetto vocals that Josh Homme hits on pretty much any Queens of the Stone Age record, and I think it's really cool to hear it there. It's thematic. This is art. I don't know. It sounds cool. Next one I have is The Way You Used to Do. Another kind of hard song to play that I'm still trying to figure out on guitar and bass, respectively. I find that the music video for this particular song is an absolute blast to watch. I also get the feeling, I don't know what it is, but every time I think of the twist dancing in Pulp Fiction, I always replace whatever is on that, what song is on there with The Way You Used to Do from QOTSA for some reason, because I think it would fit perfectly on that. I don't know. Maybe someone can make a video edit of that scene with this song overlaid on it, and it would be it would fit the vibe really damn well. Favorite amongst favorites on this album is the opener, Feet Don't Fail Me. I have played this song live a couple times as a keys and guitar sort of hybrid. Absolutely fun song to play live. I also covered it in a video some time ago as well, and it was a song that justified me using D standard for guitar and bass tuning for the first time ever, and I wouldn't have had it any other way. I have it on my list of songs that I possibly will go to my open mic at work and play it one day, but we'll see how soon that happens. So again, tying back to maybe something a little controversial here, I have Villains in an easy A tier. Again, I know a lot of people are probably not going to agree with that notion, but I really like this album, and I think it's really worth well listen. And then lastly, we have the long-awaited, from the time that Villains came out in 2017 to this year in 2023, we have the latest entry from Queens of the Stone Age, that is In Times New Roman. I just remember the hype for this album was just kind of like all of a sudden out of nowhere, where it was like, hey everybody, here's this new single, and we're dropping the album within a month, and it was like, oh, let's go. And just because of the things that Josh was dealing with in the time between Villains was out and then this album coming out, yeah, it was kind of like, man, we really do need some new QOTSA in here. I also really like I really also like the thematic elements that this album has been going for, especially like the promotional materials and even the title of the newest tour, the End is Nero tour, where it's all kind of based around Rome and Roman society in some ways. And as I know, at the time of this video coming out, where Queens of the Stone Age is due to arrive in Denver within a couple of weeks, I'll definitely be looking forward to hearing some of the tracks that they are playing off this album consistently live at the moment. I think that's going to reflect in some of my favorites here as well. I know this album's already been out for a couple months at this point, but I do feel I need a little bit more time really to kind of sit through it and really take it all in. I mean, I've done a lot of listening to it already, of course, as a fan, but I don't know, I just haven't gotten quite deep into it yet. But if we're picking favorites, I think so far I have my first pick is the opening track, Obscenery. Really cool track. I think it's really cool now that I guess it was that Queens of the Stone Age really wasn't using D standard right up until about Villains came out, and then they've kind of continued using that guitar tuning on this particular album, and I think that's cool that we're seeing extensions of that, and they're coming up with some really cool songs with that, and I think it was overall a really good song to open the album with. Next I have Paper Machete. I think this track is really cool. It just bounces really well, and then to end the song there's a really cool guitar solo that's on there, kind of reminiscent of, I would say, almost like Little Sister from Lullabies, but still distinct in its own way that fits that particular Paper Machete as a track very well. I think, though, amongst favorites, I can concretely say that Emotion Sickness is my favorite off this album, just because it was what they dropped as the single, or the lead single from the album, after, 6 years of nothing happening on the QOTSA front. And then it was just like, oh man, there's this big thematic chorus. There's all these harmonies going on with the guitar or slide guitars, two different slide guitar parts that are going. There's Troy, Dean. I don't know who's all doing the vocal harmonies on the track, but they're all coming together in this really beautiful way. And it was just like a really, hearing that song for the first time, it was like, oh yeah, the boys are back. This is going to be a great album. Ultimately, I'm not quite sure where I want to rank this album, to be honest. Again, just because I'm still kind of letting it kind of settle for me. Obviously not a bad album by any stretch of the imagination. It's just, I'm not quite sure. I have some times where I'm leaning more towards A, more towards B in terms of ranking. I'm going to kind of cheat the ranking here. I've definitely, in more heavy listening, especially in preparation for this video, I've definitely been seeing In Times New Roman float more towards the A side, or A tier side of things, with some B tier elements that are still there that I haven't quite maybe worked through all the way. So In Times New Roman is going to straddle a bit. It's going to lean much, I'll reflect that here. It's going to lean much more into the A tier side of things, with a little bit of B tier down there as well. To be honest, it's probably going to lead up into A tier at some point, I imagine, through further listening. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video, everybody. I definitely have many more of my favorite artists and bands that the tier list format would work great for doing further ranking videos on, and I definitely have some further ideas of other such things that I want to do in that format. At least for bands maybe that have at least maybe 5 or more albums, but I'll revisit those as time goes on. In terms of further things with Queens of the Stone Age, at the point that this video is coming out, I am indeed going to the September 29th show. I'm kind of working out the particular way that I'm going to get there. I don't want to quite spoil yet how I maybe am getting to the Queens of the Stone Age show in Denver at Fiddler's Green Amphitheater, because kind of an interesting story, and I think it's really cool in relation to what the work that I've done on YouTube. But when that time comes, I'll definitely reveal more and talk about how that all played out. But of course, again, Queens of the Stone Age, one of my all-time favorite bands, has a very deep catalog and very other interconnected pieces and other music that revolves around this project with its various members that is also worth checking out. And you definitely would have a lot of fun listening to it if you're into just rock music in general, because this is really cool guitar-based music. And of course, with all the regular cover videos I do, there is a deep treasure trove of further covers that I'm going to be doing from this band as time goes on. We'll definitely look to see what other awesome songs from this band I'll choose to cover. But other than that, I hope you are all having a good day otherwise, and I will see you in the next video.